The silence was the worst part. It was an active, malevolent thing that had moved into the house the day Sarah died. It settled in the dust motes, dancing in the afternoon light, and coiled in the hollow space on her side of the bed. For 3 weeks since the funeral, Mark Callahan had lived inside that silence, a prisoner in the museum of his own life. He'd walk from room to room, touching the objects she had loved. The smooth, sea-green ceramic bowl on the entryway table, the collection of vintage postcards pinned to a corkboard in the kitchen, the half-finished canvas on an easel in the sunroom, her phantom brushstrokes still hanging in the air. He was a history teacher. He understood timelines, cause and effect, the orderly march of events. But this made no sense. Sarah, his vibrant, laughing Sarah, consumed by a cancer so swift and merciless, it felt less like a disease and more like an assassination. One minute, they were planning a trip to the Oregon coast for their 10th anniversary. The next, he was listening to the drone of a eulogy, the words blurring into a meaningless hum against the roar of his grief. Today, the silence was particularly loud. He couldn't stay in the house any longer. He retreated to the garage, the one place that felt more his than hers. It was a space of organized chaos, tools hanging on a pegboard, cans of paint stacked on shelves, the scent of sawdust and motor oil a familiar comfort. He needed a project, a task, something physical to distract from the emotional wreckage. Cleaning. He would clean. He started with a stack of old boxes in the corner, things they'd meant to sort through for years. College textbooks, outdated electronics, and a large, dusty crate labeled SC Art School. He pried open the lid. Inside were sketchbooks filled with charcoal figures, dried-up tubes of acrylic paint, and canvases layered with the bold, abstract experiments of her youth. He smiled, a ghost of a feeling. This was the Sarah he first met, the one with paint-stained fingers and a fire in her eyes. He lifted a stack of canvases, and his fingers brushed against something hard and rectangular beneath them. It was a single VHS tape in a cheap cardboard sleeve. In Sarah's neat architectural handwriting, the label read, "For emergencies only." Mark stared at it, a knot tightening in his stomach. An emergency? What kind of emergency warranted a VHS tape in 2024? He remembered the old VCR they'd bought at a thrift store years ago, so Sarah could watch her art school critique videos. It was on a shelf, buried under a pile of old blankets. He'd seen it just last week. A strange current of energy, the first he'd felt in weeks, propelled him back into the house. He found the VCR, dusted it off, and carried it to the living room. The silence seemed to hold its breath as he fumbled with the cables, connecting the obsolete machine to the flat-screen TV. His hands trembled slightly as he slid the tape into the slot. The machine whirred, clunked, and began to play. The screen flickered with blue and then dissolved into a field of rolling static. Mark leaned forward, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. For a moment, nothing. Then, the static cleared. And there she was. Sarah. But it wasn't the Sarah he'd held in his arms as she wasted away. Not the frail, sallow-skinned woman from the hospice bed. This Sarah was healthy, vibrant. Her auburn hair was full and shining, her green eyes clear and focused. She was sitting in a nondescript room, a plain beige wall behind her. She looked directly into the camera, directly at him. A wave of vertigo washed over him. It felt impossibly, terrifyingly present. She took a steadying breath, her expression unreadable. Not sad, not happy, just resolute. "Mark," she said, her voice clear and calm, a voice he hadn't heard in months. "If you're watching this, it means the funeral is over. And I need you to listen very carefully." She paused, letting the words sink into the suffocating quiet of the room. He could feel his own breath catch in his throat, a strangled, desperate thing. Then she looked at him again, her gaze unwavering, and delivered the final, world-shattering blow. "I'm not really dead." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Mark's mind simply refused to process them. He felt a disconnect, a strange floating sensation, as if he were watching a movie about some other man in some other life. The Sarah on the screen didn't blink. She waited, as if giving him a moment to absorb the initial shock before she proceeded to dismantle his world, brick by brick. I know this is impossible to understand, she continued, her voice devoid of the warmth he remembered. It was the voice of a stranger. But you have to believe me. Our life, the life we built in this house, it wasn't the whole story. It wasn't even the most important part of my story. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, began to replace the grief. He watched, frozen, as she laid it all out with a chilling, surgical precision. She spoke of debts, not the credit card balances and mortgage payments he knew about, but a different kind of debt. She'd started small, borrowing money for her freelance business during a dry spell, but the loans weren't from a bank. They were from a man named Julian Croft. He's not a gangster, Mark. Not in the way you see in movies, she explained. A flicker of something, fear, respect, in her eyes. He's an investor. He finds people with ambition, but no capital, and he gives them what they need. But his terms are absolute. I got in deep. Deeper than I ever imagined, she described a world of secret meetings, of leveraging one loan to pay off another, of a spiraling, desperate dance to stay ahead of the crushing interest. The art commissions, the late nights she'd claimed were for work. It was all a lie. A meticulously constructed facade to hide the panic churning beneath their perfect suburban life. Croft doesn't just want his money back, Sarah said, her voice dropping slightly. He wants control. He owns a piece of you. I saw what happened to people who couldn't pay. He doesn't send thugs to break legs. He's more creative. He ruins lives, reputations, families. He unravels people until there's nothing left. Mark felt a wave of nausea. He clutched the armrests of the chair, his knuckles white. The woman on the screen was a phantom, wearing his wife's face, but speaking an alien language of fear and deception. The cancer diagnosis, she explained, had been her one desperate escape route. A real diagnosis, a real illness, but one she had leveraged. She exaggerated her decline to her doctors, refused certain treatments she knew might work, all to orchestrate the final act. She had faked her death. It was the only way out, Mark. The only way to make the debt die with me. To make him stop looking, the tape was nearing its end. She leaned closer to the camera, her expression softening for the first time, a cruel imitation of the intimacy they once shared. I couldn't leave you with nothing. I knew this would destroy you, and I'm sorry for that. But I saved something, for you. A way for you to start over, too. She told him about a safe deposit box at a downtown bank. The key is in your study, in the copy of Moby Dick on the top shelf. It's a fortune, Mark, enough to leave this all behind. But you have to understand, she warned, her voice hardening again. If you take it, they will know. Croft's people will be watching. They'll assume you were in on it with me, taking that money as a signal. It will lead them right to your door. The screen went black. The VCR clicked and whirred, ejecting the tape with a mundane finality. For a long moment, Mark didn't move. The silence that rushed back in was different now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with lies. The sea-green bowl, the postcards, the unfinished painting. They were all props in a play he hadn't known he was a part of. His grief felt like a stolen thing, a counterfeit emotion for a counterfeit life. Then a tremor started in his hands. It spread up his arms, to his chest, until his whole body was shaking with a silent volcanic rage. To his chest, he pushed himself to his feet and stumbled into his study. His eyes scanned the bookshelf, landing on the heavy, blue-spined copy of Moby Dick. He pulled it down. It felt too light. He shook it and heard a small metallic rattle. He tore at the inside cover, ripping away the paper until he found it. A small silver key, taped securely to the cardboard. The cold metal bit into his palm. It was real. All of it. The lie was real. A guttural sound, something between a sob and a roar, escaped his lips. His gaze fell on the shelf beside him, on a silver-framed photo of him and Sarah on their wedding day, both of them beaming, impossibly young and stupidly happy. He swiped his arm across the shelf. The photo, along with a row of leather-bound history books, crashed to the floor. The glass on the frame shattered, splintering their smiling faces. He didn't stop. He kicked at the leg of his desk, the wood groaning in protest. He wanted to destroy it all, to burn the whole lying house to the ground. Finally, the rage spent, he sank into his desk chair, the key still clutched in his fist. He stared at the broken picture on the floor, at the two strangers smiling back at him from a life that had never really existed. The house felt contaminated. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a footstep. Mark spent the next hour pacing the length of the living room, the small silver key a burning coal in his pocket. His mind was a maelstrom of betrayal and a new, terrifying emotion: fear. Sarah's warning echoed in his ears. They will know. It will lead them right to your door. He needed to talk to someone. He couldn't carry this alone. But who could he possibly tell? That his dead wife wasn't dead? That their marriage was a sham built to hide a massive debt to a predator? It sounded like the ravings of a man broken by grief. There was only one person: David. His younger brother answered on the second ring, his voice booming with a contractor's brusque energy. "Mark! Hey, man, how you holding up?" Mark sank onto the edge of the sofa, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Dave. Something's happened," he tried to explain, the words tumbling out in a disjointed, frantic mess. He told him about the garage, the tape, the money, the man named Croft. He expected disbelief, maybe even concern for his sanity. Instead, after a long pause, David's response was shockingly pragmatic. "A tape? You're sure it was her?" "It was her, Dave." "Healthy. She planned the whole thing." Another silence. Mark could almost hear the gears turning in his brother's head, processing the impossible logistics. "Jesus, Mark. So, she's alive." "I guess so." "And there's money? A lot of money?" "She said it was a fortune." Mark's voice was flat, devoid of the excitement the word should have carried. "Okay," David said, his tone shifting from shock to strategy. "Okay, so what's the problem? Get the money. Get the hell out of that house. You think she's the only one this Croft guy is going to come after? He's going to come looking for his cash, and right now, you're sitting on the X. But she said taking it would be a signal that they're watching." "They're probably watching anyway, man." David's voice was sharp, insistent. "They're not just going to write off a huge debt because of a funeral notice in the paper. You need to get that money and disappear before they decide you know more than you're letting on. Go now. I'll come over, help you pack." "We can figure this out." Mark ran a hand over his face, the logic of David's argument cutting through his daze. Maybe he was right. Sitting here, paralyzed, was the worst thing he could do. He was a target, whether he acted or not. As he listened to David map out a plan, his eyes drifted to the window overlooking the quiet suburban street. The afternoon sun cast long shadows from the oak trees. Everything looked painfully normal. Mrs. Gable across the street watering her petunias, a kid riding his bike down the sidewalk. And then he saw it. A black sedan. A late-model Lincoln, clean and nondescript, parked about 50 yards down, across the street. He didn't recognize it. No one on their block drove a car like that. A man was in the driver's seat, just a silhouette against the glare on the windshield. "Mark! You still there?" David's voice crackled from the phone. Mark's throat went dry. Yeah, I'm here." He didn't move from the window. He just watched. Was it a coincidence? Someone visiting a neighbor? Or was this the start? Was this one of them? The man in the car didn't move. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't reading. He was just sitting, waiting. Occasionally, his head would turn, a slow, deliberate movement, scanning the houses. His gaze swept past Mark's, and then, for a fraction of a second, seemed to linger. A spike of pure ice shot through Mark's veins. It was real. Sarah wasn't just being paranoid. "Listen, Dave, I have to go," Mark said abruptly, his voice low and urgent. "What? We were just making a plan. I'll call you back." He hung up before David could protest. He backed away from the window, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He crept into the kitchen, which gave him a different angle on the street. The car was still there. An anonymous black vehicle, a patient predator, waiting in the sunny, tree-lined landscape of his life. The world had fundamentally shifted. His home was no longer a sanctuary, It was a fishbowl. The quiet street was no longer safe. It was a hunting ground. He was being watched. The paranoia Sarah had warned him about was no longer a possibility. It was a suffocating reality, parked just outside his front door, 50 floors above the streets of downtown Chicago. In an office that was more art gallery than workspace, Julian Croft looked at a tablet displaying a live feed from a street view camera. The image was grainy but clear. A two-story colonial on a quiet, manicured street. Mark Callahan's house. "He's been inside for hours," said the man standing opposite his desk, a subordinate named Pierce, whose ambition was always at war with his lack of imagination. "No movement? Maybe we should just go in, ask him what he knows." Croft didn't look up from the tablet. He swirled the amber liquid in the crystal glass on his desk, the ice cubes clinking softly. The office was a monument to his philosophy: control, precision, and the appreciation of beautiful, expensive things. A single, stark painting hung on one wall. A minimalist Italian desk sat on a hand-woven silk rug. There were no personal photos, no clutter. It was a sterile environment for a sterile business. "Patience, Pierce," Croft said, his voice a low, cultured baritone. "Mr. Callahan is a history teacher, a man of routine and predictable emotions. Right now, he is marinating in what he believes is grief. To approach him now would be indelicate and unproductive. But the debt, sir, it's one of the largest defaults we've had, and Sarah Callahan made us look like fools." At the mention of her name, Croft's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He finally looked at Pierce, his eyes cold and dark. "She did more than that. It's not about the money, Pierce. It was never just about the money. It's about the message. She built a narrative, a clever, tragic one, and used it to walk away from a sacred agreement. If we allow that narrative to stand, we signal to every other ambitious client of ours that our terms are negotiable, that our reach has limits." He stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, which offered a panoramic view of the city. "This is a matter of principle. An insult that must be answered. Sarah Callahan thought she could outsmart me." He paused, a thin, mirthless smile touching his lips. "But she made a classic mistake. She underestimated the loose ends, and in this case, the loose end is a grieving husband." Pierce shifted his weight. "You think he knows something?" "I think she was too arrogant to believe he wouldn't eventually find whatever contingency she left behind. She would want him to have a soft landing. It's a common flaw in the otherwise ruthless. And when grief meets greed, greed always wins. He will lead us to her nest egg. And within that nest egg, I am willing to bet, there will be a clue. A trail. That nest egg. A destination." He turned from the window. "He will make a move. We just have to be there when he does." Keep watching, back in the house. The walls were closing in on Mark. David's words, and the presence of the black sedan, had lit a fire under him. He couldn't stay here. He had to act. He grabbed his car keys from the bowl by the door, the silver safe deposit key heavy in his pocket. He took a deep breath, opened the front door, and walked out into the oppressive sunlight, trying to look casual, like a man running an afternoon errand. He didn't look at the sedan as he walked to his own car, a sensible Toyota Camry. He got in, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb, his eyes locked on the rearview mirror. For a moment, nothing. Then the black sedan's brake lights flashed off. It pulled out smoothly and fell in about 3 cars behind him. Mark's blood ran cold. This was it. It was happening. He drove aimlessly at first, making a series of turns through the suburban labyrinth. Left, right, another left. The sedan mirrored his every move, keeping a steady, professional distance. It was a patient, unshakable shadow. Panic began to bubble in his chest. David was right. He had to get the money and run. But first, he had to lose this tail. An idea sparked. The Northgate Mall was a few miles away, a massive, sprawling complex with a multi-level parking garage, an anonymous sea of concrete and steel. He accelerated, pushing the Camry harder than he ever had. He weaved through traffic, earning a few angry honks. In the mirror, the sedan kept pace, its movements fluid and effortless. He swung onto the freeway ramp, the sedan right behind him. He took the next exit, a sharp curve that led directly to the mall's main entrance. He didn't slow down, heading straight for the parking garage. He sped up the spiraling ramp, the tires squealing in protest. Second level, third. He glanced in the mirror. The black car was just entering the garage below. He had a few seconds. He wrenched the wheel, swerving into a tight spot between a minivan and an oversized pickup truck, killing the engine and the lights. He slouched down in his seat, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his sternum, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He held his breath as he heard the sedan's engine grow louder. It drove slowly past his row, a shark patrolling the depths. He could see the driver's silhouette, his head turning methodically from side to side. Then it was gone. He heard the engine fade as it continued its search on the level above. He had done it. For now, he was free. But the chase had changed him. The fear was no longer a passive thing. It was a co-pilot, and the terror of the hunt had made one thing crystal clear. There was no going back. Mark waited in the suffocating heat of the parking garage for what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to an hour. Every passing car sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through him. Finally, convinced the sedan was gone, he started the Camry and navigated his way out of the garage, taking a circuitous route to the First National Bank downtown. The bank's lobby was an oasis of calm, all marble floors, and hushed, respectful silence. It felt like a different universe from the frantic chase of an hour ago. He approached the desk for safe deposit boxes, his hands slick with sweat. He presented the key and his ID, his signature on the form, a spidery, unrecognizable scrawl. A stern-looking woman, with perfectly coiffed gray hair, led him through a massive, gleaming steel door into the vault. The air was cool and still, smelling of old paper and metal. The silence here was different from the silence at home. It was heavy, solid, the sound of accumulated wealth. She used her key, then his, to open a small rectangular door, number 713. She pulled out a long metal box and gestured for him to take it to one of the private viewing rooms. "Press the button when you're finished," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the chamber before she closed the door, leaving him alone. The room was small, featureless, and utterly silent. Just a table and a chair. Mark placed the box on the table and stared at it. This was the point of no return. Sarah's last gift, or her final curse. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. It was not filled with neat, bank-wrapped stacks of bills. It was a chaos of cash, bundled with rubber bands and stuffed into a worn canvas duffel bag. 50s and hundreds, worn and circulated. This wasn't bank money. This was street money. He pulled the bag out. It was heavy, far heavier than he expected. He unzipped it. The sheer volume of it stole his breath. He had no idea how much was there. Hundreds of thousands, maybe more. It was a life-changing, law-breaking amount of cash. Beneath the money, there were two other items. The first was a U.S. passport. He flipped it open. The photo was of him, taken a year or two ago when he'd renewed his driver's license. But the name wasn't Mark Callahan. It was Martin Carpenter. The rest of the details, birth date, place of birth, were all different. A ready-made identity. A ghost's travel documents. The second item was a single folded piece of notepaper. He recognized the stationery, the cream-colored linen paper Sarah loved. He unfolded it. Her handwriting, the same script from the VHS tape, filled the page. "Mark, if you're reading this, you made the choice. I'm sorry. I know those words are meaningless now, but I am. I'm sorry for what this will cost you, for the life I destroyed. This is your only way out. Don't go back to the house. Don't talk to David. Don't call anyone. Take this money and disappear. Go somewhere no one knows you. Become someone else. The passport is your first step. Use it to disappear. Please, for your own safety, don't try to find me. Don't even think about it. The person you were married to is gone. Let her stay that way. Be safe. S." The note was a cold, sharp blade twisting in his gut. The casual apology? The clinical instructions. It was the final confirmation that the woman he loved was a fiction. She hadn't just faked her death. She had murdered the memory of their marriage, leaving him to bury the ashes. He stood there in the cold, sterile quiet of the bank vault, the duffel bag at his feet. This was the crossroads. He could walk out of here empty-handed, go to the police, and throw himself on their mercy. He could try to explain the impossible story, become a person of interest in a bizarre fraud case, and live in constant fear of a man named Julian Croft finding him. Or he could take the money. He looked at the cash again. It was dirty. It was dangerous. But it was also freedom. It was the plane ticket to anywhere. It was the price of a new beginning, a life severed from the poison of Sarah's lies. She had given him a choice, his safety or this fortune. But now, standing in the vault, he realized that was a lie, too. The danger was already here. The sedan, the surveillance. He was already in the game. His only real choice was whether to play with an empty hand or a full one. He made the decision. In a single, definitive motion, he zipped the duffel bag closed. The sound of the zipper was unnervingly loud in the silent room. He didn't bother putting it back in the metal box. He slung the heavy bag over his shoulder, the weight of it a shocking, tangible reality. He walked to the door, pressed the call button, and didn't look back at the empty box on the table. He walked out of the vault, past the stern-faced woman, through the marble lobby, and out into the bright, indifferent afternoon sun. A ghost named Martin Carpenter, carrying a fortune that might just get him killed. The drive home was a blur of hyper-awareness. Every car behind him was a potential threat. Every shadow held a phantom menace. But he made it back to the house without spotting the black sedan. He parked in the garage, closing the door quickly behind him, his heart still thrumming with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Inside, he locked the door and drew the curtains. The house felt alien, a stage set he was about to abandon. He dropped the duffel bag on the floor in the living room. The heavy thud was a sound of absolute finality. He had it. He had the money. He needed a place to hide it, just for tonight. He'd leave first thing in the morning. His eyes scanned the room and landed on the old cedar chest that served as their coffee table. It was filled with photo albums and old mementos. He quickly emptied it, stacking the albums on the floor, each smiling picture a tiny accusation. He placed the duffel bag inside, covered it with a blanket, and closed the lid. A surge of adrenaline-fueled confidence washed over him. He'd done it. He'd faced the fear, evaded the tail, and secured the money. He'd done it. For the first time all day, he felt a flicker of control. He had a chance. He pulled out his phone and dialed his brother. "Did you get it?" David asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "I got it, Dave," Mark said, a triumphant tremor in his voice. "I'm home. I think I lost them." "Holy shit, Mark, you actually did it." "How much is it?" "I don't know. A lot. More than I've ever seen." "Okay, good." "That's good," David said, his relief palpable. "So what's the plan?" "You need to get out of there, tonight. Come stay with me. We'll get you a burner phone, pack a bag, and you're gone by sunrise." The idea of seeing his brother, of not being alone in this haunted house, was intoxicatingly appealing. "Yeah. Okay. Let me just get a few things together. I'll be there in an hour. Be careful, Mark. You hear me?" "Don't stop for anything, I will," Mark promised. "I'll see you soon." He hung up, feeling the knot of tension in his shoulders loosen for the first time. David was right. He had a path forward. He would grab his laptop, a few clothes, and the most important personal documents he could find. Then he'd walk out the back door, hop the fence to the neighbor's yard, and be gone. As he turned to head upstairs, the doorbell chimed. 2 short, polite rings. Mark froze, his blood turning to ice. No one ever came to the door unannounced. Not anymore. Since the funeral, friends and neighbors had learned to call first, to give him space. The only unexpected visitor had been a delivery driver last week. He crept to the front door, his heart pounding a frantic, suffocating rhythm against his ribs. He leaned in, his eye pressed to the peephole. The distorted, fisheye view showed a man standing on his porch. He was in his late 40s, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, his silver-black hair impeccably styled. He wasn't large or physically imposing, but he radiated an aura of unnerving stillness. He was smiling faintly, a patient, predatory expression. Mark knew, with a certainty that left no room for doubt, who this was. Julian Croft. He backed away from the door, his breath catching in his throat. He was trapped. The duffel bag with the money was 10 feet away in the cedar chest. His only way out was the back door. But how could he get there without being heard? The man on the porch didn't ring the bell again. He simply waited. Then, his calm, reasonable voice cut through the thick silence. "Mark Callahan?" he called through the door. The voice was smooth, educated, with no trace of menace. That made it even more terrifying. "My name is Julian Croft. I was a business associate of your late wife." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air like a death sentence. "I was so very sorry to hear of her passing. I was in the neighborhood and thought I might stop by to offer my condolences in person." Every polite, civilized word was a threat. "I know who you are. I know where you live. I am here." Mark's world, which had briefly expanded to include a future and an escape, now shrank to the 3 feet of hallway between him and the front door, with the devil ringing the bell. Mark stood paralyzed, his mind screaming at him to run, to bolt for the back door. But he knew it was too late. A man like Julian Croft wouldn't come alone. There would be someone watching the back of the house, the sides, every possible exit. Opening the door was a surrender. Not opening it was a confession. He took a shaky breath, walked to the door, and turned the deadbolt. The click echoed like a gunshot in the silent house. He opened it. Julian Croft's smile widened slightly. "Mr. Callahan. Thank you. I was beginning to worry you weren't home." His eyes, the color of slate, flickered past Mark, taking in the living room in a single, sweeping glance, before settling back on him. They were intelligent, analytical, and utterly devoid of warmth. "I'm not really seeing visitors right now," Mark managed, his voice thin. "Of course." "A terrible time for you," Croft said, his tone dripping with a sympathy so false it was obscene. "But I won't take a moment of your time." "May I?" He gestured past Mark into the house, not so much asking a question as stating an intention. Cornered, Mark stepped back, and Julian Croft walked into his home. He moved with a quiet, confident grace, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the hardwood floor. He surveyed the room, his eyes lingering for a fraction of a second on the cedar chest before moving on. He knew. Of course he knew. "Please," Croft said, gesturing to the armchair. "Sit." "You look as though you're about to collapse," Mark numbly did as he was told, perching on the edge of the sofa. Croft remained standing, circling the room slowly, running a finger along a bookshelf. He was claiming the space, establishing his dominance. "Sarah was a remarkable woman," Croft began, his voice conversational. "So much ambition. A real artist, not just with a brush, but with finance. She saw angles others didn't. A rare talent." He stopped and turned to face Mark directly. "But talent, like any other asset, must be managed. It must be disciplined. Sarah, I'm afraid, lacked discipline." "I don't know what you're talking about," Mark said, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. Croft chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Let's not insult one another's intelligence, Mr. Callahan. You went to the bank today. You retrieved a rather heavy duffel bag. A bag filled with my capital. I'm simply here to collect it." He wasn't demanding it. He was stating a fact, as if discussing the weather. This calm, psychological pressure was infinitely more terrifying than a direct threat. Mark's mind raced, searching for an escape, a denial, anything. "That money!" "It was a life insurance policy," Mark blurted out. Croft's expression hardened, the mask of civility slipping for the first time. "No, it was not. It was stolen property, and your wife was a thief. But this is about more than just a simple theft." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a photograph, placing it gently on the cedar chest between them. "Do you know who this is?" Mark looked. It was a picture of a young man, barely in his 20s, with a wide, naive smile. He looked a bit like Croft. "My younger brother, Daniel," Croft said, his voice now laced with a cold, hard venom. "He worked for me. He was the one who vetted Sarah, vouched for her. He saw her ambition, as he called it, and he believed in her. She cultivated his trust, used him to secure more and more capital, far beyond our normal limits. He bent every rule for her. And when her house of cards collapsed, she didn't just default on me, she destroyed him. My brother, he took his own life 3 months ago, unable to face the professional and personal humiliation." The air left Mark's lungs. This wasn't business. This was vengeance. "So you see," Croft continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "I'm not here just for the money. I am here to settle an account. I want my property, and I want any information you have. Where did she go? What was her plan? I will find her, Mr. Callahan, and I will unravel her new life, just as she unraveled my brother's." The final unspoken threat hung in the air. If Mark didn't cooperate, Croft would unravel his life too. As if to punctuate the thought, Croft placed a second photograph on the chest, next to the first. It was a picture of David, his brother, taken from a distance, with a long lens. He was at a construction site, laughing with one of his crew, completely unaware he was being watched. The photo was time-stamped in the corner. It had been taken that morning. "Your brother is a contractor, isn't he?" Croft said softly. "See, it's a dangerous line of work." So many variables, so many opportunities for things to go wrong. Checkmate. Mark stared at the photo of his smiling, oblivious brother. Sarah hadn't just endangered him. She had placed his entire family in the crosshairs of a grieving, ruthless monster. His choice was gone. His future was gone. All he had left was a desperate, primal need to protect David. "What do you want?" Mark whispered, his voice broken. Croft's polite smile returned. "The bag." And everything you know, defeat settled over Mark like a shroud. He looked at the picture of David, then at the cold, expectant eyes of Julian Croft. There was no way out. He had to give him the money. He had to protect his brother. "All right," Mark said, his shoulders slumping. He felt hollowed out, a fragile shell. "You win." He lifted the lid of the cedar chest. Fragile shell. Croft's gaze was fixed on the canvas bag, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "But the rest, the information," Mark began, his mind frantically spinning, grasping for a sliver of leverage. "She didn't tell me anything on the tape, nothing about where she was going. It was the truth. But she was meticulous. She planned everything. She must have had a contingency, a backup plan. She kept a storage unit, over on the industrial side of town. All her old art school stuff is there. If she left a trail, it would be there. It was a complete lie, born of sheer desperation. But he delivered it with the conviction of a man with nothing left to lose." Croft considered it for a moment, his head tilted. "A storage unit? Plausible. Very well, we'll all go. You, me, and the bag?" "Fine," Mark said, "but I'm not leaving my house without that photo of my brother." Croft picked up the picture of David and handed it to him. A sentimental man. I can appreciate that. Mark slipped the photo into his pocket as Croft hoisted the duffel bag, testing its weight. "Lead the way, Mr. Callahan." They walked out to the black sedan. A driver sat behind the wheel, and another man, Pierce, was in the passenger seat. Mark was directed into the back, with Croft beside him, the duffel bag between them like a barricade. As the car pulled away from the curb, Mark felt his last connection to his old life severe. But his mind was no longer numb. It was sharp, clear, focused by the terror. Sarah's final note had mentioned a new passport. There had to be other tools. He slid his hand into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the photo of David. And then he felt it. Tucked into the duffel bag, he had found more than just cash and a passport. There had been a small, cheap burner phone, still in its plastic packaging. In a moment of frantic preparation after calling David, he had activated it and slipped it into his jacket pocket. A ghost of a plan, a desperate Hail Mary, began to form. Keeping his movements small and hidden, He pulled out the burner phone. Under the cover of the seat, he typed a quick, anonymous text to 911. Armed kidnapping in progress. Black Lincoln sedan. License plate. He risked a glance out the front windshield, memorizing the plate number. Headed toward Warehouse District off River Street. Victim is Mark Callahan. Suspect is armed. He hit send, his thumb trembling. Turn left up here, Mark instructed the driver, directing them not to a storage facility, but to a derelict area of abandoned warehouses he knew from his morning runs. It was a dead-end street, isolated and remote. The car rolled to a stop in front of a massive brick warehouse with shattered windows. "This is it?" Croft asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "Unit 12, Mark said, pointing at a rusted garage door. They got out of the car. The air was still and heavy with the smell of decay. As Croft's men flanked him, Mark could hear it in the distance. A faint, rising siren. Then another. Croft heard it too. His head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as he stared down the street. "What did you do?" he snarled, the civilized mask finally gone, revealing the predator beneath. "She told me you were smart," Mark said, his voice shaking but steady. "But she said you had one weakness. You can't stand being made a fool of." The sirens grew louder, closer, converging on their location. Red and blue lights began to flash at the far end of the street. Croft looked from the approaching police cars to Mark, his face a mask of pure, murderous rage. For a heart-stopping second, Mark was certain Croft would pull a gun and kill him right there. But then, something shifted in Croft's eyes. The rage was replaced by a cold, reptilian pragmatism. Killing Mark now meant a murder charge, a life in prison. Escaping meant he could rebuild. He shoved the duffel bag into Mark's chest, knocking him backward. "This isn't over," Croft hissed, his voice a low promise of future violence. He gave a sharp nod to his men. Pierce and the driver were already scrambling, but it was too late for them. Police cars screeched to a halt, blocking the street. Too late for them. Croft, however, didn't hesitate. He turned and sprinted toward a darkened alley between the warehouses, disappearing into the shadows, just as the first officers swarmed the car, guns drawn. Epilogue: the aftermath was a long, bureaucratic blur. Julian Croft's men were arrested, and the money was confiscated as evidence. Mark spent days telling his impossible story to a series of incredulous, but ultimately convinced detectives. Croft had vanished, becoming a wanted fugitive. His escape meant Mark would never be completely safe. But with his organization dismantled, the immediate threat was gone. The money was gone. The house was gone, sold to pay off the legal fees and the legitimate debts Sarah had left behind. Mark walked away with nothing but his life. He moved to a small coastal town in Washington, 1,000 miles from the ghost of his past. He got a job teaching history at the local high school. He rented a small apartment overlooking the gray, churning Pacific. His brother David was safe, and their bond, forged in terror, was stronger than ever. They talked on the phone every Sunday. He never heard from Sarah again. He accepted that she was a phantom, living a new life bought with the wreckage of his. Sometimes, at night, he would wonder where she was, who she had become. But the questions no longer held the power to wound him. One evening, 6 months after he'd left Chicago, he walked down to the rocky beach as the sun set, painting the clouds in shades of bruised purple and orange. He took the last picture he had of them, the shattered, smiling wedding photo he had salvaged from the floor of his study, from his wallet. He looked at the face of the woman he had loved, the stranger he had married. Then, with a final, quiet sense of release, he tossed it into the surf and watched as the ocean pulled it under, washing it all away. He was scarred, he was alone, but for the first time in a very long time, he was free.